Hey there, sewers. Welcome to DartandSew. If you have a home sewing machine but don't know what type of needle to use, this is a great tutorial for you. When I first bought my sewing machine, I felt very overwhelmed by all the needle choices, so I had to do a lot of research to figure out what to use. But luckily, you don't have to do the same because I am going to give you some tips on how to simplify your sewing machine needle options. By the end of this tutorial, you're going to be very confident in what type of needles to use for your basic sewing needs. There are many types of needles depending on the type of project you're doing, whether it's your regular sewing or embroidering or quilting. There are many types of needles you can use, but today we're going to focus on the type of needle you need to just sew with your home sewing machine. So first, let's start with the basics. There are two things you need to know about sewing machine needles. The two S's, style and size. Style is dictated by the type of fabric you're sewing. And size depends on the thickness of the fabric you're sewing. Style means the shape of the tip of the needle. There are many styles and shapes of needles today, but we're going to focus on the type you need to use for everyday sewing needs. So the three most important styles to know are the standard or the regular point needle, the ballpoint or the stretch needle, and the heavy duty needle that you need for thicker fabrics. These are the three most important to know. Needles usually come in a pack like this. A pack may be all one style or an assortment of styles, and the same goes for the sizes that are written at the bottom, like you can see here. Regular point needles are used for woven fabrics. Woven fabrics are basically non-stretch fabrics, the type of fabrics with the threads that run horizontally and vertically. If you look up close, you can see the thread fibers running this way and that way. And if you pull on them, they don't have any stretch. The tip of these regular point needles are sharp so that they can penetrate into these woven fabrics easily without snagging. If you use these types of needles on stretch fabrics, you can snag your fabric, and you can also get skips in your stitches. The second type of needles are ballpoint needles. There are similar types of needles called stretch needles, and they can be used interchangeably for sewing knits and other elastic or stretchy fabrics like these. This is a knit fabric, and you can see that it has a two-way stretch. This is another knit fabric. So these types of fabrics, you would use a ballpoint needle for. Another one is t-shirt material. That is also something you would sew with a ballpoint needle or a stretch needle. Ballpoint needles or stretch needles have rounded tips that go in between the loops of thread in the fabric, whereas a regular needle would snag. Using these types of needles on regular fabric would cause puckers and snags as well. So if you have funny looking stitches, make sure that you're using the right type of needle for the fabric. Of course, it helps to make sure you've also threaded your machine correctly. The third type of needle you need to use is a heavy duty needle. And this is a type of needle you use for thicker fabrics like denim, leather, canvas, things like that, like this, that are very thick, or fabrics that need to be sewn in multiple layers. The tip of this needle may be wedge-shaped, so it can cut through things like leather and thicker fabrics. And it also has a larger eye for using thicker threads. So these are the three main types of basic needles you should get familiar with. But there is good news. There is such a thing as a universal needle. Here I have a Schmidt's brand universal needle, which is the one I see in a lot of craft shops. The universal needle is like a combo between the regular and ballpoint needles. It has a slightly rounded tip, and you can use it to sew most woven fabrics and knits. It's an all-purpose needle, so when in doubt, use a universal needle. But pay attention to the size because it's not a one-size-fits-all type of needle. You will need to choose the right size for the thickness of fabric that you're using. Which brings us to the sizes. Needle sizes come in the form of a European size / an American size. The first number is the European size, which is the larger number, and it runs from 60 up to 120. The second number is the American size, which runs from 8 to 20. These are all the sizes. The sizes run from 60/8, which is the smallest size needle, all the way to the largest needle. So the higher the number, the larger the needle size. So how do we choose the needle size? We use the smaller needles, for example, the ones that start with 60 or 70 for lightweight fabrics like these, like organza, chiffon. This is a light lining fabric. This is lace, silk. And we use the medium size needles, like the ones that start with 80 or 90 for medium weight fabrics, such as cotton, or this is a knit fabric. This is a little thicker cotton. This t-shirt material. Those are all ones that you can draw. These are all fabrics that you can sew with the medium size needles. The larger needles that start with 100 or higher are used for thicker fabrics, and those are things like this denim and this suede material and things like that. Now, if you're sewing upholstery and thicker industrial type fabrics, then you might need to use the 120 or 110 needle. The size of your needle matters, because if you use large needles in light fabrics, they make large holes that may be visible, and also the stitches look bad. And if you use a needle that is too thin for your thicker fabrics, then your needle might break and the stitches might also look bad. A good rule of thumb is to use the 70/10 needles for lightweight fabrics and the 100/16 for thick denim or canvas type fabrics, and use the 90/14 for everything in between. Unless you're sewing luggage and industrial material, you shouldn't need anything larger than this 100/16 needle. But you may need 110 or even the 120 if you're sewing thicker canvas or sewing multiple layers of the thick canvas or leather. So it is good to have at least, one of those needles. There are specialty needles like the twin needle, which is basically two needles with a single head. And this type of needle is used for the decorative stitches when you hem t-shirts and things like that. And there are overlock needles that you use with serger machines, and there are embroidery needles when you're using machines that have the embroidery capability. But you don't need to use these for everyday sewing. So when you are in doubt about what type of fabric you're using, whether it's woven or stretch, or if you don't want to switch back and forth too much between the regular and the ballpoint needles, use a universal style needle. And a size 90/14 universal needle like this will be okay for most of your sewing needs. Now, as far as what type of brand to buy, the short answer is it doesn't matter. There are many easily accessible brands at local craft stores and online. Now, I use a lot of this Schmetz and Singer needles because they are easy to find locally and don't have to order them online and wait for them to come. But I think that you can look online and compare prices and buy anything that suits, your price point. Both brands come in a variety of sizes and styles. So my final advice is that it is a good idea to have an assortment of shapes and sizes of needles at home, so you have them ready when you need them. Have a couple of packs of your go-to needles, like a 90/14 regular or a 90/14 ballpoint or a universal needle. and a pack of needles for lightweight fabrics and a pack of needles for thicker fabrics. One reason that you need a supply of needles at home is because needles sometimes break. And the other reason is that you should also change your needles after sewing for a total of 8 or 10 hours on them. So 2 signs that your needle is overdue for a change is if you see tears through your thread, and also if you hear popping sounds when it penetrates your fabric, or if you find that your needle gets all tangled up in your machine and you have to keep rethreading your needle of your machine. So to summarize, the 2 S's: when in doubt about style, use a universal needle, and when in doubt about size, use a 90/14. That's a good rule of thumb that would work in most cases until you're very comfortable what type of needles to use. I hope this tutorial was helpful to you. Thank you for watching.